So today I bring you a bunch of controllers from PS1, PS2 and PS3. I have gone through all of them and checked what is wrong, so we will just clear one of them with the major issues, which I think it will be just the ribbon cable. This one, for example, top button and the triangle are not working. So I assume this will be a flex cable change in most of them, so I'll show you all on this, and then if something's different on the other ones I will then show you what I am doing. So let's start up by removing the 6 Phillips screws. So with the screws removed, we just take the bottom cover from the controller and see the insides. So we have two types of controllers. This one has a board that has the ribbon cable attached like so. And here we can see that there's corrosion on the pins. So this may be the issue. Let's see. And then we have other ones that the ribbon cable is connected by pressure, not by a connector. So let's go on to this one and see if we can fix it. So let's start to see if the pins have a connection between them on the parts where they are corroded. We have a beep, so they are connecting. So we need to remove this rust and see if that sorts our problem out. To remove the rust, I will use this steel brush. It should clean out any rust that is between the two pins. As you can see, it's starting to remove pretty quickly. We need to use it on a low rotation so it does not melt the plastic and damage the board as well. So let's keep on doing until we have clean and shiny pins. As you can see here, no more corrosion. Let's then do a quick test on it and see what happens. So as it did not work, let's then go through the pins and see if we have a connection anywhere that does a bridge. Other than the ones that should bridge, I don't see an issue here anywhere, so I assume the corrosion is all gone from this connector. So let's do a quick clean with IPA to make sure that no debris are inside, and now we will go through where all the pins connect and see if we manage to find any that is not connecting properly to the chip. So all the connections seem to be okay with the chip. Let's move on to our next diagnose, which is the connector that goes into the console. See if it connects to the board. So with our multimeter we just need to check connection between one end and the other of the cable. If one of them is failing, then we probably have a broken wire. In this case, all seem to do a connection. So let's now remove the board and check the ribbon cable itself for resistance on the button that is not working, to see if it's different from the other ones. And here we put on an ohms reading and check the two ends of these pads over here, and they all seem to have the same amount of resistance, which is 18.6 mega ohms. So they should be fine, I think. In any case, let's do a quick clean on the pads that connect to the flex by just rubbing them gently on a paper towel, and this should clean out any excessive carbon that is there that may be not doing a connection to the button. We clean also the area of the flex cable, and we put it back together and do a quick test to see what happens. So as it did not work The only thing I can think of is to remove the flex from here and replace it with a new one. So let's do that. So for starters, we need to place a bit of flux on the connector. These boards cannot be heated with a lot of heat, so make sure you put just enough for the solder to melt. And don't leave the iron on top of the connector too long, otherwise you will risk the board to be lifting up and blowing the pads and the traces. How do I know that? You will see on an upcoming controller that I tried to fix before. So once that is done, we apply a bit of flux again on this new solder that we placed, and then we pass with this wick to remove all of the solder, so we can then start to lift up the connector. To lift the connector, we need to pull it up, and with the iron we heat up the pads until we release each one of them. Make sure to be careful doing this, otherwise you may lift the pads from the board, and that will give you a lot more work in the future. So let's do a quick close-up over here so you can see exactly what I mean by lifting and heating the pads. So to be easier, I'll just cut the ribbon, as I will change it anyway, so I have more where to move this connector from. So as you can see, I'm heating up the pad over there. I feel that is missing a bit of flux, so I'll put a little bit more. And now we pass the iron on until we manage to release all of them. This has to be done very, very, very gently, otherwise you will risk losing the board. With that done, let's do a quick clean with IPA. Let's remove this excess solder that we have on the pins. We just pass the iron from bottom to the top, and now with the cotton bud we remove the excessive. So here, as you can see, one pad has lifted, but thankfully it connects on top, so let's just put it straight again and it should be okay, just like so. Now cleaning with the brush, make sure, and with the cotton swab, make sure to always swipe from top to bottom, because that's where they are connected, so they don't break again. We now put a bit of flux, and with the iron let's reinforce our leaded solder so we can then put a new connector in place. We do a little clean again to make sure that the pads are clear of any debris. And this connector, as you can see, only has 18 pins. There are 19 pins in total, so we can just skip the pin that has number 19, which connects to ground. So we need to put it from number 1 to number 18. In this case, it's written 19 on the board. So to make sure that this pad connects to ground, we do a quick connection test and we see that that's true. So now this is the position where we need to put our connector. Let's put a bit of flux on each end so we can attach it without it being removed by accident. So we now place it on its final position, and then with our iron with a bit of solder we will just touch the pins so we can place it steady. So we need to make sure that it is in place, and this is where we touch with our iron with a bit of leaded solder so that the pin is connected. As you could see, it moved a bit, but it's not that bad. So now, once we have it connected in place, we will then put solder in all the pins. So let's add a bit of flux so the solder can flow. And now with solder on our iron, let's then pass it through and make sure that all the pins are soaking wet in solder and connected to the pad. If necessary, pass it several times until any bridges are cleared. If all things were done correctly, this should be the looks of it. So let's clean it and then do the connection test to see if every pin is solid. In this case, thankfully, everything is solid. So now it's time to fit in the new flex cable. This I will try to put it straight through the little port and into the connector. I think this will be a little difficult to do because I don't have any space for my fingers to grab it and pull it in, and it's quite stiff to put in the connector. So after a few tries I just realized I need to insert it first, then fold it in a way that it fits through the little gap, so it will be then placed on the plastic frame. So we now fold it without bending, just trying to do this because it's a bit hard, so I can put it through the little gap and then finally close the controller. So once that is done, we need to adjust this little part over here where the L1 and R1, R2 and L2 will be, because this is a bit large for the frame. So we need to cut it, making sure that we cut the part that does not have a trace. Because if we do cut the part that has a trace, it will be a gone flex. So carefully we just cut the little extremities of it so it fits right in place. You don't want it to be in an oval shape, because that way when the button is pressed it may not register. And this will be how it's supposed to look like. So when you press it in, it will be straight without any flaws. So after that is done, let's then put the controller back together and test it. This is controller number 2. The up button and the triangle button are not working. So this was going to be a simple change of connector and flex, but I lifted here a few pads. So I will want to show you how I will sort this out. And we will go through each of the pads to see if they connect to the chip. So the pads are all connected to the chip. I did that off camera, so now I will just add a bit of UV mask. Just put a little bit so it covers the area that was lifted, just like so. And with our UV light we leave it there like for 5 minutes or so until it dries out and gets solid. So 5 minutes have gone by. Let's just do a quick test to see if it's solid enough so we can then solder our connector. Yes, it is. It's not sticking back, so it's good to go. So you've seen how this works. Everything is okay except this little pad that has broken from the trace. I will then show you what am I going to do here. I will just scrape the trace until I get the copper on site. Once that is done, we will flood it with solder because it's just a little short gap. We will manage to do that without putting a wire on it. So adding a bit of flux, and the iron has already a bit of solder on it. So let's then try to fix this connection just with solder. Sorry for the noise, my neighbor was doing some works on his house, and here, as you can see, the connection is done. So let's do a quick test to see if it connects to the chip. Yes, it does, so it should work fine. So we will cover it with a bit of mask and let the UV light dry it out, so it will be good to go. It's now dried out, so let's get into the assembling. Controller number 2 is working fine. Triangle and up are okay. Let's go then to controller number 3, which the triangle, circle are not working. This is a controller that I have worked on this following video that I'm linking on the right side of the screen, and it was working, but it stopped working. Now it doesn't even show as a controller when I connect it to the PS2. So I assume this soldering job, this poor soldering job that I did, I was still learning, so this should be the issue, but let's check it. So as you can see, the wire is not connected anymore from one end to the other. This should connect here, and it's not doing that. So let's remove this poor job that I've done over here. It was the best I could do at the time. I now have a little bit more experience, so let's try to sort that out. Let's clean it with IPA to remove this UV mask. Now with our tweezers, let's just try to remove the most of it until we get to the solder. So I don't think the wire is doing its job for some reason. It was before, but now it's not, which is very odd. But let's just redo all this anyway. So yeah, for some reason this wire is no longer connecting one end to the other. I'm not sure what the problem is here, but it really does not connect from one end to the other for some reason. I'm not sure what is going on over here. So just to double check, I've opened another controller just to see where the trace goes, and it does indeed, from the 4th pin goes to the ZD2 thingy. So yeah, it must connect there. So the wire is not doing its job for some reason. Let's so you can just make sure here that this connects from one end to the other, from the 4th pin to this little chip. So let's then use a bit of heat to remove this wire. We put a bit of flux, and with our soldering iron, let's just remove it from there. Now we clean with IPA and leave it to the cotton swab to remove the rest of this UV mask. So it's very stuck in, so let's just scrape it with our tweezer to make sure we have a clear path to put a new wire to connect this trace to the pin. So after cleaning, I also scraped the ground plane, which is an issue, so I will need to put UV mask again just on that little area to avoid any short circuits. Otherwise, if it's shorted, it will not work. So we have a connection from the little chip to the trace, and obviously this ground plane is connecting to ground and not to the trace, which is good. So let's put a little bit of solder mask here just to cover the area that I accidentally scraped, and use the UV light to dry it out for around 5 minutes. This should be done now. So let's use our flux and put a little bit of leaded solder on the trace and on the little pin, so we can then connect a new wire to see if the controller comes back to life. So let's heat up the pin so it soaks a bit of solder on it. As it does no longer have a pad, it will have to be flooded with solder around it, so we can then put a new wire connecting the trace and the pin. The trace has already a little bit of solder on it as well, so let's then grab a wire and put it here. So just to make sure that this wire connects, as you can see, it beeps. So we flood it with a bit of solder, a bit of flux, sorry, and then we put our iron with a bit of solder in order to make it solid. So it's now one solid wire from one end to the other, just making sure that it will connect from one end to the other. It does. So let's just cut it and use it on our DualShock controller. So here we go again, a bit of flux to let the solder flow, and then we place the wire so we can then connect the two ends. As the wire is full of solder and there's solder also on the trace, this should be pretty straightforward. Just a little touch with the iron should glue it in place. And now on the pin we do exactly the same thing. As you can see, the solder went straight in, which is perfect. So now let's just cut the excess wire. Just to make sure that it will not touch the ground, I will just give it a little touch with our tweezer to make sure it will be on the trace and not on the ground plane, just like so. And now let's do a quick connection test to see if we have both ends beeping, which we do. And now we cut the excess wire, and we will obviously need to put again a little bit of solder mask to make sure this doesn't short anywhere. Let's just bend this little bit of wire into the pin. And it is still connecting, so we are safe and good to go. So let's do a quick clean here with our cotton swab to remove the excess flux. And then we will put again a bit of solder mask just to clean and have this properly isolated. We will add our UV light now and leave it for around 5 minutes for it to dry out the place. So we now have removed the UV light. When to test, it now works, but the buttons still don't work, so let's change the ribbon cable. You saw that, and we'll test it after and see what happens. And this is now controller number 3 that I have opened on the previous repair to check the connections, and this doesn't do anything. I did already try to fix this one, and unfortunately I put too much heat on this board and it lifted up. So that's mainly the reason why it's probably not working. So let's remove the connector and see if we can still do anything about it. So we just need to proceed as we did before. Flux, apply solder, clean, flux again, remove solder, and apply heat to remove the connector. As you can see, some pads are now coming off, so this will probably be a no fix because it's too much work for a controller. So I'll probably just leave this for spares in case I need some. As you can see, this is completely trashed now. So this would be the new connector for this controller, and since the board is bent, the connector is not flat, so it would not make a proper connection, especially with the missing pads. So let's just leave this for parts, because if I have time someday I will fix it, but it's no longer worth it. Now, this controller only needs the new analog sticks, so this will be a quick one. Let's get into it. This one is quite dirty on the inside. It was never opened. One of the cables for the rumble motors is broken. We need to fix that, so we'll probably just put new solder on both of them. As you can see here, the black one is broken. So we had a bit of flux. Apply new solder on it. And then we redo this soldering job. As you can see, this is the original solder because it's blowing out, and I'm not really sure why the old solder does that, but it does. So now that we have unsoldered the connections for the rumble motors, let's just remove these joysticks, do a quick clean because this controller is fairly dirty. As you can see, the insides of the joysticks are brown, and we'll do a cleaning here so it doesn't look that bad. I will eventually clean them all, but for now it's just fixing time, and I will probably do another video or just clean them and show them up afterwards on the next part so that you can see that all of them are working on the consoles. I just harvested the two joysticks from the previous 4 parts controller that I left, so these are basically in brand new condition. So let's use them on this working controller. Here is just me cleaning the remains of someone else's finger. As you can see, it was very dirty. So let's now close the controller up. Just a quick tip on this sponge over here that does a pressure on the flex cable. If we put a little bit of IPA on it, it will get very swollen. As you can see, it's starting to swell, and it will apply more pressure on the flex cable, so the controller will not fail. So it is done and working flawlessly. So let's get on to the next controller. So this is the 6th controller. We will need a new ribbon cable and a new carcass on this because this one is all cracked, as you can see over here, and obviously analog sticks. So let's open it up. So this is a pressure flex cable, which is nice. There are, as I can see here, all of the rumble motors are disconnected. So this was probably tempered already. That's why it didn't have any dual shocks. And the ribbon cable is completely wasted, as you can see. And the wires are all gone from the connector as well. So this will be a lot of work to put to work again. So what I'll do is I will leave this for parts as well, because this will take too long to fix. Let's go on to our PS3 controller. It needs a ribbon cable and 2 dual shocks. So let's get into it. So here's the insides of it. This ribbon cable looks new, but apparently it's not working. These sometimes come with defect and don't work at all. So let's just replace it and see what will happen. So ribbon cable is changed. Let's then put the controller back together and do a quick test to see what happens. So on these controllers we can use the gamepad tests that are all over the internet. I like to use this one because it's very simple. So let's test the buttons and see what happens. So down button on the D-pad is not working. The others are. All of the buttons are working except the R2 and the left L2, sorry, and the down pad. Analogs are also clicking. So we probably have another flex cable with a defect, I would say. Maybe I'll just order one and deem this as almost fixed, since only 2 buttons are not operating, and I'll order a new flex and see what happens. But well, for now it was almost successful to fix this controller. So this wraps up the part 1 of this video, because there are a lot of controllers. I still need to see the PS1 ones. So we have fixed 4 of the PS2 controllers and almost fixed the PS3 one. So I will see you on the next video.